The summer of 1914 began with shimmering heat across the streets of Sarajevo, a city caught between history and empire. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, ruled by an aging monarch, had long tried to tame its restless provinces, but none was more difficult than Bosnia. On the morning of June 28, the heir to the throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and his wife Sophie, rode in an open-topped car through the city's narrow streets. Crowds gathered with curiosity and whispers, while a group of young nationalists, barely men, stood waiting. They were members of the Black Hand, a secret Serbian organization determined to strike at Austrian rule. Among them was Gavrilo Princip, sickly and poor, but burning with passion for the idea of a greater Serbia. As the motorcade approached, one conspirator threw a bomb. It bounced off the car, rolled onto the street, and exploded under the next vehicle, injuring several. The Archduke insisted on visiting the wounded at the hospital, his pride hiding the fear that his wife, calm beside him, seemed to feel. In a cruel twist of fate, their driver took the wrong turn into Franz Joseph Street, where Princip stood. The Archduke and Sophie found themselves face to face with the assassin. Princip raised his pistol, fired twice, and in a moment soaked in blood and disbelief, the heir and his wife collapsed. Within minutes, both were dead. Sarajevo had erupted into chaos, and within weeks the whole world would be at war. News of the assassination traveled like fire through Europe. Vienna seethed with outrage. To many in the imperial court, this was not just the death of their future emperor, it was an insult to the very dignity of the empire. In the cafes and ministries, the whispers grew louder: Serbia had to be punished. Yet Serbia was not an ordinary adversary. Russia, its Slavic protector, watched over it, bound by cultural and political ties. Still, Austria felt confident, for its ally was Germany, led by Kaiser Wilhelm II, who believed in standing firm and striking fast. The German leadership offered what came to be known as the blank check, a promise of full support for Austria, no matter the consequences. The July crisis had begun. In the smoky rooms of Vienna, ministers debated feverishly. The military chiefs pushed for war, while the diplomats hesitated, aware of the dangers of Russian intervention. For days they prepared a harsh ultimatum for Serbia, one designed not to be accepted but to provoke. By July 23, the document was delivered. Serbia had 48 hours to comply with demands that infringed on its sovereignty, including Austrian officials participating in investigations on Serbian soil. To refuse would mean war. Belgrade trembled. The Serbian government, aware of its vulnerability, sought to stall, to appease, to survive. They accepted nearly all conditions, but rejected the one clause that violated their independence. To Austria, this was enough. War was decided. In Berlin, the Kaiser celebrated, believing the confrontation would remain local, a quick strike to teach Serbia a lesson. Yet the machinery of alliances was far more fragile and dangerous than he realized. Russia, unwilling to see Serbia crushed, began to mobilize. At first, it was only partial mobilization against Austria, but soon, under pressure from generals, it spread to a general mobilization across the empire. The Tsar, Nicholas II, hesitated. He exchanged telegrams with his cousin Wilhelm, the famous Willy Nicky, correspondents, each trying to pull back from the brink, each trapped by military timetables and national pride. The armies of Europe were like enormous machines that, once set in motion, could not be stopped. Mobilization was seen as a threat in itself. To delay was to risk being destroyed by a neighbor. Who acted first? By late July, trains began moving, troops assembled, and reserves were called. France, bound by treaty to Russia, watched anxiously. President Poincaré, visiting St. Petersburg, promised support. Paris knew that if Germany struck east, France would not remain untouched. Meanwhile in London, the British cabinet argued bitterly. Many wanted to stay out, to avoid continental entanglements. But Germany's war plans, the infamous Schlieffen Plan, targeted France through neutral Belgium. The moment German troops crossed Belgian soil, Britain's decision would be made. By July 28, Austria declared war on Serbia. Shells fell on Belgrade. Crowds cheered in Vienna, but elsewhere fear grew. On August 1, Germany declared war on Russia. On August 3, Germany declared war on France and prepared to invade Belgium. On August 4, Britain declared war on Germany. The world had stumbled into catastrophe. The second scene opened on European capitals now consumed by frenzy. In Berlin, the Kaiser rode through streets packed with cheering crowds, their faces lit with torches and enthusiasm. Few could see beyond the excitement of war to the destruction it would bring. In Paris, soldiers marched off to shouts of, "A Berlin," believing the war would be over by Christmas. In London, posters promised glory, and young men rushed to volunteer. But beneath the cheers was a profound sense of inevitability. Statesmen who had once tried to balance peace were swept away by the tide of military necessity and public opinion. Russia's vast countryside echoed with the rumble of mobilization. Millions of peasants called to fight a war they barely understood. In Austria-Hungary, ethnic divisions threatened unity, yet soldiers marched with pride, unaware their empire was entering its death struggle. Germany, efficient and confident, launched its armies westward, convinced that swift victory was possible. But the truth was darker. The July crisis had revealed how fragile peace was, how entangled alliances, pride, and fear could transform a regional dispute into a world war. Every power believed they were defending themselves, yet all contributed to the escalation. Assassination led to ultimatum, ultimatum to mobilization, mobilization to declarations of war. No one planned for a global conflict, yet by early August 1914, the guns of Europe thundered. The story of why the First World War broke out lies not only in Sarajevo's gunshots but in the decisions made afterward, decisions bound by arrogance, fear, and mistrust. The assassination provided the spark, but the July crisis provided the firewood. Miscalculation and rigidity made compromise impossible. The empires of Europe, once masters of diplomacy, fell victim to their own strategies and illusions. And so the world was plunged into war. Fields from Flanders to Galicia would soon be soaked with blood. The lives of millions would be consumed. Empires would collapse, revolutions would erupt, and a century would be reshaped. It began with a wrong turn on a Sarajevo street, and it ended with the destruction of a generation. The July crisis was not only a sequence of political decisions, it was a tragedy of human failure. Leaders thought they could control events, but events controlled them. They believed war would be short, yet it stretched on for years. They believed their nations would emerge stronger, but many were left in ruins. As the summer of 1914 faded into autumn, Europe marched into the abyss, driven by pride, bound by treaties, and blinded by the belief that war was unavoidable. In reality, it was a choice, one that leaders made, one that millions paid for with their lives.